Victorian parenting in the 19th century was a complex amalgamation of strict discipline, moral instruction, social expectation, and emerging scientific thought, shaped by the rigid social hierarchies and cultural norms of the era. From the earliest years of a child's life, parents, particularly in the middle and upper classes, adhered to a philosophy that emphasized obedience, self-control, and the cultivation of virtues deemed necessary for social respectability and moral rectitude, with fathers and mothers assuming distinct roles that reinforced the patriarchal structure of society. Fathers were considered the ultimate authority figures, responsible for providing for the family, enforcing discipline, and instilling moral guidance, while mothers were charged with the daily management of the household, nurturing the children, and supervising their education and social conduct. The home was not merely a domestic space, but a moral training ground where every aspect of a child's behavior was observed, corrected, and molded according to prevailing ideals. Children were expected to internalize rules and codes of conduct, often enforced through strict schedules, rigorous routines, and, in many cases, corporal punishment, which was widely accepted as an essential tool for shaping character and ensuring compliance. From the moment of birth, infants were subjected to routines that prioritized health, hygiene, and moral instruction, with nannies and governesses playing crucial roles in the daily supervision and early education of the child, particularly in wealthier households, while lower-class families relied on extended family networks and the practical knowledge of mothers to manage child-rearing under more constrained economic circumstances. Feeding practices were heavily regulated, with physicians and pamphlets promoting specific methods intended to foster robust physical development and prevent illness, while clothing, sleeping arrangements, and exposure to play or leisure were meticulously controlled to balance the perceived needs of health, propriety, and moral formation. Children were introduced to education at a young age, with curricula emphasizing reading, writing, arithmetic, religious instruction, and lessons in social etiquette, obedience, and self-restraint, reflecting a belief that moral and intellectual formation were inseparable and that character could be shaped as early as infancy. Discipline was considered essential, and Victorian parents were often uncompromising in the application of rules, with even minor infractions prompting corrective measures ranging from verbal reprimands to physical punishment, as books and manuals of the era advocated the use of the rod as a means of instilling respect for authority and a sense of personal responsibility. The notion of childhood itself was framed through moral and social lenses, with innocence intertwined with the capacity for sin or misbehavior, necessitating constant guidance, supervision, and correction to ensure the child's eventual emergence as a morally upright and socially competent adult. Emotional expression was carefully managed. Affection was given in measured doses, and displays of excessive sentiment were often discouraged, reflecting broader societal anxieties about self-indulgence, weakness, and the proper cultivation of stoicism and resilience. Literature, religious tracts, and advice manuals proliferated, offering prescriptive guidance to parents on how to raise children properly, with emphases on punctuality, obedience, modesty, cleanliness, temperance, and piety, while cautioning against indulgence, overprotection, or excessive emotional attachment. Gender roles were central to Victorian parenting practices, with boys encouraged towards self-reliance, industriousness, and preparation for public life, often through rigorous schooling, apprenticeships, or exposure to the labor market, while girls were trained for domestic management, refinement, moral guardianship of the home, and social propriety, including accomplishments such as music, needlework, and conversational skills designed to enhance marriage prospects and reinforce social hierarchies. Religious instruction was omnipresent, as the prevailing Christian ethos dictated that moral education was inseparable from spiritual formation, and children were often required to memorize scripture, attend regular church services, and participate in devotional practices that reinforced obedience, humility, and fear of transgression, while literature often portrayed ideal children as obedient, diligent, and morally exemplary, setting benchmarks for parental expectations. Childhood illnesses, accidents, and mortality shaped parental attitudes profoundly, fostering a climate of vigilance, precaution, and sometimes emotional distance as parents navigated the tension between care, protection, and the inevitability of loss in an era when infant and child mortality remained high, despite advances in medicine and public health. The rise of the middle class and industrialization introduced new pressures and anxieties as parents sought to secure the social advancement of their children through education, moral discipline, and carefully curated social interactions, while simultaneously negotiating the demands of wage labor, household management, and social visibility in a culture that increasingly measured worth through propriety, respectability, and economic success. Punishment was codified in both literature and practice, with corporal punishment administered by parents, teachers, or governesses widely justified as an expression of love and responsibility, a necessary intervention to correct character flaws, and a safeguard against future moral failings, while indulgence, leniency, or emotional softness were condemned as potentially harmful to the child's development. Play was circumscribed by social norms. Leisure was acceptable only when it reinforced moral and physical development, encouraged obedience, or cultivated socially approved skills. Excessive freedom or unsupervised play was often seen as a precursor to moral disorder or indiscipline, with parents meticulously curating play environments and supervising activities to ensure compliance with social conventions and moral expectations.
To prevent the development of vice, laziness, or inappropriate behavior. The psychological theories of the time, though rudimentary by modern standards, contributed to evolving practices, with notions of innate temperament, hereditary morality, and the influence of environment shaping parental strategies, emphasizing early intervention, careful supervision, and the systematic shaping of character. Siblings were socialized into hierarchies and moral codes, with elder children often tasked with the supervision of younger ones, reinforcing obedience, responsibility, and domestic order, while domestic servants played integral roles in maintaining discipline, monitoring behavior, and ensuring adherence to household routines, reflecting the stratified nature of Victorian domestic life. Education, both formal and informal, was imbued with moral purpose, as reading, writing, and arithmetic were inseparable from lessons in virtue, punctuality, self-discipline, and respect for authority, while boarding schools, apprenticeships, and charitable institutions extended these principles into public life, preparing children to navigate social hierarchies and professional expectations with propriety and efficiency. Social class profoundly influenced parenting strategies. Wealthy families could afford governesses, tutors, and controlled environments, while working-class families relied on practical experience, neighborhood networks, and moral instruction filtered through churches or philanthropic organizations, resulting in varied expressions of the same overarching Victorian ideals of obedience, propriety, and moral vigilance. The era also witnessed growing concern with the health and development of children, as urbanization, industrialization, and medical advances created new knowledge about nutrition, hygiene, and the consequences of neglect or mismanagement, leading to prescriptive guidance on bathing, feeding, exercise, and clothing that sought to produce physically robust and morally disciplined children capable of fulfilling societal expectations. Parental anxiety was heightened by contemporary literature, scientific treatises, and advice manuals, which warned against negligence, indulgence, and the failure to instill self-control, presenting children as inherently impressionable and morally malleable beings, whose futures were contingent upon the vigilance, discipline, and moral rectitude of their parents. Emotional restraint, duty, and the cultivation of personal virtue were central themes, with parents modeling behavior for children through example, admonition, and correction, creating a structured environment in which the cultivation of character, moral fortitude, and social competence were inseparable from the daily rhythms of domestic life, schooling, and social interaction. Childhood was constructed as a time of moral formation rather than personal freedom, with the child's agency subordinated to the demands of societal expectation, religious instruction, and parental authority. And deviation from prescribed norms was met with admonition, punishment, or structured correction designed to reinforce obedience, self-restraint, and conformity. Corporal punishment, though sometimes severe by contemporary standards, was normalized, rationalized as a moral necessity, and widely accepted across social classes, reinforced by educational manuals, religious texts, and popular literature. While psychological distress, rebellion, or resistance by the child was often interpreted as a lack of moral fiber or parental failure, rather than a response to the intensity of discipline. Victorian parenting also encompassed moral education in public and private spheres, with parents curating the company their children kept, the literature they consumed, the games they played, and the activities they pursued, ensuring alignment with values of modesty, propriety, religious observance, and social hierarchy, while parents monitored language, manners, and demeanor as essential markers of social competence and moral development. The development of domestic manuals and prescriptive texts further codified parenting practices, offering detailed guidance on everything from feeding schedules, toilet training, and bathing routines to the administration of punishment, selection of governesses, and moral instruction, reinforcing a culture of parental vigilance, responsibility, and moral oversight that permeated daily life. Gendered expectations dictated differential treatment, with boys groomed for public life, intellectual achievement, and professional success, while girls were inculcated with skills, comportment, and moral instruction necessary for domestic management, marriageability, and social propriety, reflecting the pervasive influence of patriarchal norms, religious doctrine, and social stratification in shaping childhood experience. The emphasis on self-control, punctuality, obedience, and moral integrity created a culture in which childhood innocence was recognized, but constantly disciplined, regulated, and framed as a preparatory stage for adult responsibility, social conformity, and moral rectitude, with deviations carefully corrected through a combination of admonition, structured routine, and physical punishment. Religious morality permeated every aspect of child-rearing, with scripture, hymns, prayer, and religious observance forming the backbone of daily instruction, while children's literature, including cautionary tales and moral stories, reinforced obedience, respect, and social propriety, providing exemplars of virtuous behavior and consequences of disobedience or moral failure. The daily life of children was highly regimented, with precise routines governing waking, sleeping, eating, study, chores, and recreation, each designed to cultivate discipline, health, and moral awareness, while parental oversight ensured adherence to rules and the internalization of socially approved values. Victorian concerns about health, nutrition, and hygiene intersected with moral instruction, producing guidance that often emphasized restraint, moderation, and routine, discouraging excess, indulgence, or laxity in bodily and moral habits, and encouraging early development of self-control, responsibility, and personal hygiene. Play, creativity, and emotional expression were tolerated only insofar as they reinforced moral, social, or intellectual development, with imaginative activities, games, and leisure carefully curated to avoid moral contamination or social impropriety, while free exploration was often limited by concerns about safety, virtue, and decorum. Child-rearing manuals, religious tracts, and educational texts reinforced a vision of the child as impressionable, morally malleable, and in need of constant oversight, shaping parental practices that combined affection, vigilance, and authority in a seamless system designed to produce socially competent, morally upright, and disciplined adults capable of fulfilling the expectations of Victorian society. Across social strata, the core principles of Victorian parenting, obedience, moral instruction, discipline, and social propriety remained consistent, though their implementation varied according to economic resources, family structure, and social ambition, reflecting a society deeply invested in the cultivation of character, respectability, and hierarchical order from the earliest stages of life. Corporal punishment, structured routines, religious and moral instruction, and careful attention to social comportment represented the tools by which parents sought to mold children into acceptable adults, while the intense focus on discipline, morality, and propriety often overshadowed the emotional needs, individuality, and personal freedoms of the child, highlighting the stark contrast with contemporary approaches to parenting that prioritize emotional support, autonomy, and psychological well-being. Victorian parenting in its entirety was thus a reflection of its era, a combination of moral earnestness, social ambition, patriarchal authority, and prescriptive guidance that placed the cultivation of character, obedience, and respectability above all else, employing methods that today would be considered extreme, abusive, or illegal, which were normalized, justified, and celebrated as essential to the proper raising of children and the maintenance of social order, with each aspect of daily life, from feeding and clothing to schooling and play, infused with ethical, social, and moral significance, leaving a legacy of historical practices that continue to fascinate, horrify, and inform modern understanding of childhood, discipline, and family life.